49ers wide receiver Brandon Aiyuk had quite the rookie season, but is he being overdrafted in 2021? Let's talk about it with SI senior fantasy analyst Michael Fabiano. Fabs, hey, we all love rookie wide receivers, especially when they're as productive as Brandon Aiyuk, over 700 yards. He had, I think, 5 touchdowns. He caught about 60 passes. But what do we really expect from him this upcoming season?
A lot of folks, including myself, think he could break out. But there are certainly some question marks and some red flags when it comes to Aiyuk. Last year, he was very good. Now, he played in just 12 games. He had 748 yards, as you mentioned, 5 touchdowns. If you project his numbers and that average of about 15.4 fantasy points per game that he had during a 6-game stretch where he was one of the top wide receivers in fantasy, I mean, we're looking at a guy who could be 12th or 13th in fantasy points, right in that same neighborhood last season as A.J. Brown. So the numbers are potentially there, but as we'll talk about, there were some reasons why Aiyuk was so good during that stretch.
Let's talk about Kyle Shanahan and his offense, because we know that throughout history, Shanahan's offense has produced some really good, valuable fantasy football playmakers. But to have George Kittle coming back, to have Deebo Samuel coming back, what does that mean for Aiyuk's target share and his role in Shanahan's offense?
Well, first off, Shanahan hasn't had a whole lot of success with wide receivers from a fantasy perspective in San Francisco. No wideout has finished better than 31st in points. That was Deebo Samuel in 2019. He had success on other rosters, but not in San Francisco. And also, the Niners have a negative trend, right? I mean, remember Jerry Rice and Terrell Owens? Those guys were great. It's been a while since the Niners have had an elite fantasy wide receiver. In fact, just two, Anquan Boldin and Michael Crabtree, have scored more than 200 fantasy points as a member of the 49ers in the last 10 years. That's it. They're also the only two wide receivers to have more than 1,000 yards in a single season during that time. So it's been Boldin, Crabtree, and everybody else. I like the talent with Aiyuk. Don't get me wrong. Here is where you have to be somewhat concerned. That 6-game stretch where he was uber productive. Well, George Kittle was hurt. Deebo Samuel also missed some time. He was hurt as well. Keep that in mind, folks. So overall, when you look at the numbers, he's a guy who's going to average right around 11, 12 points per game. But George Kittle was gone for half of last season. Deebo Samuel missed several games during the course of last season. So with the top two options going into the season in the passing game missing time, Aiyuk, of course, was going to see more targets. There was no question about it. How is he going to fare when you have both Deebo and Kittle on the field at the same time, right? And let's look at that number. 4 games last year where this trio was on the field together. All 3 were active. Kittle had a 30.1% target share. He averaged almost 21 points a game. Samuel, 16.5% target share, averaged 10.5 points per game. Aiyuk was third in target share at 15.8, and he averaged just under 12 points a game. So if we assume that Kittle and Deebo will stay healthier in 2021 than they did last season, well, that's a smaller target share for Brandon Aiyuk and potentially something that hurts his ceiling. Also keep in mind, Jimmy Garoppolo comes into the year as the starter in San Francisco. He's never really been a great fantasy quarterback, let's put it that way. And he's not guaranteed to keep that job. They drafted Trey Lance, which means what? These guys could have a rookie quarterback throwing the football sooner rather than later. And will Lance be more like Justin Herbert or Tua Tagovailoa? We're going to find out. Regardless, a lot of questions about Brandon Aiyuk. I love the talent, but I don't know that he'll meet expectations with the Niners at full strength at wide receiver and tight end.
He's coming off the board as the 62nd overall player, 26th for wide receiver. I mean, that's greatly being overdrafted right now.
I think so. I think he's a wide receiver 3. He's being drafted as a high wide receiver 3, but I do feel like folks need to temper those expectations because Shanahan has not had a lot of success with wide receivers in San Francisco. Maybe the talent's better now. I mean, I would argue that it is, but this is also a team that's going to lean on the run. Trey Sermon is in the mix. Raheem Mostert, of course, in the mix as well. And you do have question marks at the quarterback position. Jimmy Garoppolo is not a guy who's going to take a lot of deep shots. He's never been a guy who has been a quarterback who scores a lot of fantasy points. keep that in mind as well. And as much as we love Trey Lance, there are some folks out there that believe that he's somewhat of a project. He's got the skills, he's got the tools, but maybe not a kid who's going to come out and make that Herbert type impact in his first NFL season. So if you draft Aiyuk, it should be as a 3. And I would certainly temper expectations because there's no guarantee that he'll be first or second in terms of that target share in the Niners pass attack.
All right, we got plenty more great fantasy football draft analysis all up on Sports Illustrated. We're here to help you dominate and win your leagues. Go check it out, si.com/fantasy.